All right, you know what? Let's get started. Hey, it's me, Saul. Oh, that was disgusting. I'm gonna say it again. Hey, it's me. Okay. So today we're doing something a little bit different. Today I'm going to be starting a series. It's called the 101 series, where I take you through the basics of a deck that I know and love, that I've built, maybe an archetype or something like that, to help you get the ropes of it. So today, the first thing on the agenda, the first item on the agenda is the Bujins. Now, I'm going to be making a deck building guide, but I decided to start the 101 series before the deck building guide came out, just so that there was a bit of a foundation for people to understand the way that I build decks and how I play the game, in case you're running with my opinion. So, my favorite deck in the game, my favorite deck that I've ever built, is a Bujin deck. Not the most meta thing in the world, but here it is. Today, I'm going to show you a bit about the Bujins, help you learn who they are, what they do, how they play, and so on and so forth. That's not all true. We're probably going to stop at who they are and what they do. So the very first thing to find out is how to get a Bujin deck. Now, the Bujins are an interesting archetype. The reason being, they are scattered throughout a variety of packs. To be honest with you, to get the majority of the relevant cards, you need to go through 5 different boxes. It's the 12th main box, Crusaders Battlegrounds, the 30th main box, Shining Hope, the 24th, I'm sorry, I'm not doing it in order, the 24th main box, Aerial Assault. Actually, no, I'm not sorry, I take it back. The 9th mini box, Resonance of Contrast is what it's called, and then the 16th main box is Black Storm Rising. Now, while editing, I realized that might sound like a lot, but as you'll soon see in the video, the reason why they're within so many different boxes, and the reason why it's not that big of a deal, is because you don't need all of the cards in this archetype to make a Bujin deck work. In fact, there are only roughly 4 cards that are essential, and everything else can be mixed and matched. So in terms of essential things that you need to function, I'd say you only need 2 to 3 boxes max. And then if you want a specific custom card for your Bujin deck, or to fulfill something specific within your Bujin deck, that's when it starts to widen and widen and widen. But we'll get to it. Now, the reason that you don't need, depending on how you want to build a Bujin deck, you don't need to get the cards from all of these boxes. And a big benefit of the Bujins is that none of them are ultra rare. They're all super rare cards or below. Relatively easy to get your hands on. So let's get started. Let's get started with finding out who they are and what they do. It's here. Okay, cool. Okay, so if you search Bujin in the card catalog, as you can see, I've done my fair share of grinding to get my Bujin deck to where it is. But we'll start with the most important cards and move from there. Before I get started, though, I do want to say, every archetype in Yu-Gi-Oh! Has something that it does. And so a good way to help you understand what the Bujin and Bujingi monsters are trying to do before we get into the details is to briefly explain it here. I'll explain it again once we talk about each of the individual cards, but for starters, the Bujin archetype is an archetype that's based on Japanese mythology. It consists of all level 4 or rank 4 monsters, right? The archetype has 4 main monsters, which are all beast warrior monsters. They're called the Bujins. Now, the rest of the monsters that are in your main deck are called Bujingi monsters. The Bujingi monsters all have effects that activate from the graveyard or the hand to protect the Bujin monsters on the field. So the aim with this deck is get your beast warriors on the field, get your beasts in the graveyard, and then just pop up with your variety of effects, because each beast warrior has a different effect to help get things into the graveyard or into your hand, and each beast monster has different effects that activate in the graveyard. It's a very wide variety. We'll get into it soon, but let's just get started. So, the first card on the agenda is Bujin Yamato. He is the core of the deck. Once per turn, during your end phase, you can add 1 Bujin monster from your deck to your hand. Then send 1 card from your hand to the graveyard. You can only control 1 Bujin Yamato at a time. Right? So this card is the engine of the deck, because how the Bujins work is you have the Beast Warrior type monsters, the Bujin monsters, and then you have the Beast Warriors, the Bujingi monsters for the most part. Now, how it works is the Bujin monsters all have effects that facilitate sending cards from the deck to the graveyard, or from your hand to the graveyard, or something along those lines. And then the cards that you're sending into the graveyard, the Bujingi monsters, all have graveyard effects that can only activate from the graveyard. Mostly, we'll get into it. So, as you can see with a system like that, having a card that directly lets you choose any card from your deck and send it to the graveyard, extremely useful. So the next Bujin card to cover is Bujin Mikazuchi, right? When a Beast Warrior type Bujin monster you control is destroyed by battle or by card effect and sent to the graveyard, you can special summon this card from your hand. So this one offers you a bit of protection from destruction if it's in your hand. And to clarify, why I say protection from destruction here is because while this won't negate the destruction effect taking place on the field, it will go from your hand to the field to replace whatever monster was destroyed. So you still have a body on the field, which meets the Beast Warrior requirement for the Bujingi monsters to activate their effects. So let's say Yamato was on the field. Yes, Yamato is gone, but Yamato wasn't going to do anything by himself on the field anyway. One of the monsters in your hand or in your graveyard was going to support Yamato in order to help him make it to the next turn. Now, even though he's gone, because Mikazuchi is now on the field, you have another body that fulfills the same requirement. So whatever your plan with the cards in the graveyard or in your hand was, it can still be achieved. And so that's why I say it's protection, because you don't really lose anything other than obviously going -1. So yeah, once per turn during the end phase, if a Bujin monster was sent from your hand to your graveyard this turn, while you control this face-up card, you can add one Bujin spell or trap card from your deck to your hand. You can only control one of these as well. Now, the thought process is, if Bujin Yamato has activated his effect, drawn a Bujin monster from the deck to the hand, and then sent a card from, the hand to the graveyard, that means Mikazuchi automatically gets to activate his effect. So, they work hand in hand together. Bujin Yamato is more important, Mikazuchi is more like backup. Next, you have Bujin Arasuda. If a Bujin monster in your graveyard or face up on your side of the field is banished, except during the damage step, you can special summon this card in your hand in face up defense position. Once per turn, during the end phase, if a Bujin card was added from your deck to your hand this turn, except by drawing it, you can draw one card and then discard one card. You can only control one Bujin Arasuda. Now this is like the little brother to the other two Bujin cards. Just like with Mikazuchi, Yamato's effect will allow his effect to activate, and so in the ideal situation, you have all three of them on the field. Yamato activates, which causes Mikazuchi to activate, which causes Arasuda to activate. Now, why I say he's like the little brother of them is he's basically Yamato, but worse.
Why you bullying me?
He adds a card from your deck to your hand, but you don't get to choose what card that is. So you could add a Bujin monster to your hand, which would be great, and then you discard it, or you might add a valuable spell or trap card to your hand, and we'll see how it goes from there. But yeah, so those are the three main Bujin monsters that I would say. But however, you still have the odd, are you a boy or a girl? I was gonna say the sister. Anyway, this is Bujin Hirume. Cannot be normal summoned or set. Must first be special summoned from your hand by banishing one Bujin monster from your graveyard except itself. If this card was summoned this way and is destroyed by battle or by card effect, and okay, you know what? I'm not gonna read it. I'm just gonna tell you what it does. If this card gets destroyed, you can discard one card from your hand and force your opponent to discard a card from their hand as well. Kind of useful, but in a lot of decks nowadays, your opponent can gain advantage by sending a card from their hand to the graveyard, so it's a risk. Right? The benefit of this is that it can special summon itself, which is very integral to what the Bujins are currently all about. With the rise of XYZ monsters, you have XYZ summoning, and so mid-game, this card has a very easy time helping you to bring out a rank 4 monster because you can do this along with your normal summon. It requires no other resources other than itself, so it is probably the easiest card in this deck to XZ summon with. It just requires a very specific game state. So yeah, now, I hope I haven't lost you yet. This part of the video I've re-recorded. The reason being, I watched what I had done back, and while it made perfect sense to me, someone who has basically mastered this archetype, the point of this video is to help you, a commoner, the lay folk, to understand what this archetype does. And so what I've done is I've gone into 4 card boxes, packs, decks, and I've divided up what the archetype is. The Bujin monsters, the Bujingi monsters, the Bujinte monsters, and the spells and traps. Don't worry, I'm going to explain everything. So, we've already looked into what the Bujin monsters themselves are. You have the Bujin Yamato, you have the Bujin Hirume, you have the this boy, and then you have Bujin Arasuda. So if you want to understand them better, just go back and watch it again, or leave a question in the comments and I'll answer you about what these 4 main cards do. These are your Beast Warrior monsters. Now, we've talked a lot about how the Bujingi monsters are the support beast monsters for the Bujin monsters. So let's learn a little bit about their effects, right? I don't use all of them because this is where the archetype gets most of its bulk from. There are a lot of effects that each of these monsters have, and not all of them are insane, but because you have so much variety, no 2 Bujin decks will ever look exactly the same because of all the different things you can do. It depends on the strategy you're trying to achieve. So let's start at the very beginning. The Bujingi Crane, a winged beast type level 4 light monster. During damage calculation on either player's turn, if a Beast Warrior type Bujin monster you control battles an opponent's monster, send this card from your hand to the graveyard and the attack of your monster becomes double its original attack during that damage calculation only. Now, the benefit of this card is it gets activated during damage calculation, not during the battle phase, meaning that most effects that your opponent will have used or will be able to use, they won't have access to them anymore at the stage at which you activate this card. So you just get a massive boost in your attack. You get double your original attack. Now, the second and the biggest benefit of this card is the fact that it doubles your original attack. Let's say you've gotten Wall of Disruption or the Lunalight Fox has lowered your attack to 0. Your attack is shooting right up to double what it originally was, right? Now, the crazy thing is, after this effect has resolved, your attack gets reset back to its base. So let's say you have gotten Wall of Disruption and your attack is now 900. After you use this card and double your attack, when the doubling effect is over, you go back to whatever your original attack was, like the initial effect never happened. It's a hard reset on your attack. It's crazy. The only downside of this card that I can think of is that it only doubles your original attack. So let's say you've boosted your attack with an effect or a skill in the middle of a duel. It doesn't matter. That boost is going to disappear and you're going to go to double your original attack for the damage calculation. So that is what the Bujingi Crane does. In my opinion, one of the best Bujingi support monsters available in the game. It's a super rare and for good reason. So let's move on. Next, you have the Bujingi Crow. When a Beast Warrior Bujin type monster you control is targeted for an attack by an opponent's monster, you can send this card from your hand to the graveyard and negate the attack. If you successfully negate the attack, inflict damage to your opponent equal to a quarter the attacker's attack. You can only use the effect of Bujingi Crow once per turn. Now, as you see, there's a hard once per turn on this card. A lot of the Bujingi support monsters have a once per turn on their effect. When they don't have a once per turn, I'll let you know. For instance, the Crow didn't have a once per turn. You can do this as many times as you want. So say you have, that was the wrong button. Say you have 3 crows in your graveyard, in your hand rather, you can send all 3 to your graveyard and boost your attack 3 times during 3 different damage steps effectively. When it comes to the Crow, on the other hand, it doesn't have that option. You can only do it once, and it basically acts like a Sphere Karibo. You negate the attack, but rather than setting your opponent to defense position, it makes it so that, you know, your opponent takes damage equal to a quarter of the attack. It's a decent effect, not one that I often use myself, but yeah, it's basically like a Sphere Karibo specifically for the Bujins. The Bujingi Wolf. Other Beast Warrior and Winged Beast type monsters and beast monsters that you control cannot be destroyed by battle. So this is like the Amazonas Queen, I think that's what it's called, where no other monsters you control can be destroyed by battle until this card is destroyed. Interesting, not insane. You have the Bujingi Hair. During either player's turn, you can banish this card from your graveyard and target one Beast Warrior Bujin type monster you control. During this turn, it cannot be destroyed by battle or by card effects once. You can only use this effect once per turn. So this is a hard protection effect. It makes it so that you cannot be destroyed by anything. Now, of course, effects that don't destroy will still go off, but if it's a destruction effect or if you're about to be destroyed by battle, you get to live once, right? Next, you have the Bujingi Quillin. If you control a Beast Warrior type Bujin monster, you banish this card from your graveyard and target one face-up card your opponent controls and destroy it. Again, a hard once per turn, but this gives you the ability to destroy any card on the field that can be targeted, right? So it's basically like having a Raigeki break without having to have a Raigeki break. You can destroy anything on the field once per turn. Now, something to note is, and as we get into more and more effects, it will become clear, even though each Bujingi monster can only be used once per turn, they can all be used together. So say you want to destroy something, you use Bujingi Quillin, and then you want to beat over whatever's left, you use the crane. Or you need to protect yourself from destruction, use the Bujingi Hair, right? The next card on the list is Bujingi Sinew, and this, in my opinion, is one of the most underrated cards in the deck. It's been overshadowed largely by Crane, but it fulfills a role that the Crane can't actually handle for you. During either player's damage step, so this activates before the Crane does, if a Beast Warrior Bujin type monster you control battles an opponent's monster, banish this card from your graveyard and your monster gains attack equal to the attack of the opponent's monster, right? This is until the damage step ends, and if it does, all battle damage your opponent takes is halved, right? So what this card says is, you've attacked me, no matter what your attack is, mine will be higher. It takes whatever your opponent's attack is, adds it to whatever yours is, and you can beat over your opponent, but the downside is they only take half of the battle damage. But more often than not, it's not the battle damage you're after, it's effective invincibility from losing a monster to battle, right? A lot of the time people will attack into this and get destroyed as a result, because yeah, it will beat over anything. The only hard counter to this is, let's say your monster's attack has been set to 0. That means, you know, if attack gets added to your monster's attack, then you're just going to tie with your opponent, or if you're going up against another Bujingi Sinew. So this does something that the Crane can't do, but at the same time, it doesn't hard reset your attack. There are advantages and disadvantages to this card, but I keep this as a last resort in case my opponent summons like a huge boss monster. The highest attack that the Crane can boost your Bujin monsters to is 4,800, because the strongest Bujin monster has 2,400 attack. But with Sinew, no matter what, if your opponent has a 7,000 attack monster, you'll beat over it. So it has its uses. Next, you have the Bujingi Boar. If you control a Bujin monster, so this is any Bujin monster, not just the Beast Warriors, you can banish this card from your graveyard and target one face-up attack position monster your opponent controls, change it to defense position, and if you do, its defense becomes 0 until the end of this turn. So this is like another Sphere Karibo, but one that you can activate on your turn. So yeah, you change your opponent's defense to 0, change them to defense position, and you can crash right into them, and any Bujin monster on the field can do it. So let's say you've bricked and this is in your graveyard, you banish it, use a Sinew, smash into your opponent, and their monster is gone. Next is the Bujingi Centipede. If you control a Beast Warrior Bujin type monster, you can banish this card from your graveyard, target one spell and trap your opponent controls, and destroy that target. You can only use this once per turn. So, destroy any spell and trap on the field, you're good to go. Again, this can be used alongside Quillin, so you can pop one spell and one monster, or you can pop 2 face-up spell cards, or rather 1 face-up spell card with Quillin and 1 face-down spell card with Centipede. Really no limits. Next is one of the strongest monsters in the Bujin archetype. During either player's turn, you can banish this card from your graveyard and send one Bujin monster from your hand to the graveyard. You take no damage this turn, and that is no damage. It doesn't say no battle damage, it says no damage. If it's effect damage, you won't take it. Battle damage, you won't take it. Your opponent cannot touch you this turn, right? Nothing can touch you the turn that you activate this effect, which means that with my core strategy of the Bujins, this card is integral. I'll show you in the deck building video that's coming next how I use this card to my advantage, but this is just absolute protection. It's basically like using there's a Karibo that makes it so that you take no battle damage on a turn, but this card doesn't have to be destroyed. You just have to banish it for that effect, and you gain advantage because you can send another Bujin or Bujingi monster to the graveyard, and that's what this deck is all about, so it's great. You have the Bujingi Raven next. When a Bujin monster you control is destroyed by battle with an opponent's monster and sent to your graveyard, you can send this card from your hand to the graveyard and destroy your opponent's monster. So this doesn't protect you per se, but it's like a revenge card. If you get destroyed, let's say it's a really big problem monster that you just couldn't get over, you use the Bujingi Raven, and even though you still got taken out, your opponent's monster is gone too. Next, you have Bujingi Swallow. During your main phase 1, so again, this is just an error in printing because it's from the TCG. We don't have a main phase 2, but ignore that. During your main phase, you can send this card from your hand to the graveyard and target one Bujin monster you control. It can make a second attack during each battle phase during this turn. Other monsters you control cannot attack during the turn you activate this effect. So it's basically a double attack. Some strategies use this card. I actually used to use this card in one of my core strategies. Very interesting effect, and if paired correctly with some of the other monsters on the page right now, you can win the game based on just this effect. I'll show you how to do it in the how to build the Bujins section, but this card it might not seem like the craziest thing in the world, but it can be very powerful under the right circumstances. Next, you have the Bujingi Turtle. During either player's turn, when a card or effect is activated that targets a Bujin monster you control. So once again, this is a Bujin monster, not a specific Beast Warrior monster, so it can work on any of the cards here. Except during the damage step, you can banish this card from your graveyard and negate the effect. So anything that targets, if it's a Karma Cut, if it's anything that targets a monster on the field, you can negate this. You can negate it with this card's effect. This isn't a hard once per turn, so that means you can do it multiple times if you have enough of these in your graveyard. Very useful. Bujingi Ibis, this boy. During your main phase, you can send this card from your hand to the graveyard and target one Bujin monster you control. This turn, if it attacks a defense position monster, inflict piercing battle damage to your opponent. Now, why that's interesting is because we already talked about the Bujingi Boar. So say you use these two cards together. I'm already talking about the combos. But yeah, say you use these two cards together, that means you just get free piercing damage and it can win you the duel. Next is a Bujingi Offidian, a card that almost no one, I've never seen anyone else use this card, but I use it as a core card in my Bujin deck. During your main phase, you can send this card from your hand to the graveyard, target one Bujin monster you control, it can attack your opponent directly this turn. This is not a hard once per turn, which means if you have two of these in your hand, two of your Bujin monsters can attack directly and you can potentially win game based on this alone. Now you have Bujingi Pavo. When a Beast Warrior monster you control is destroyed by battle, Bujin specifically, and it's sent to the graveyard, you can send this card from your hand to the graveyard to special summon one Bujin monster from your deck. You can only use this effect once per turn. Now this is interesting because it's basically what Mikazuchi does, but without being Mikazuchi, because let's say a Yamato is destroyed, you send this from your hand to the graveyard, you get another Yamato on the field rather than Mikazuchi, so interesting. And then lastly, you have Bujingi War. While this card is in face-up defense position, other Bujin monsters you control cannot be destroyed by card effects. So this is effectively what the wolf does, but rather than being for battle, it's for card effects. And yeah, those are the Bujingi support monsters. There's a lot of them, as you've seen. Any effect you can think of in the game, it basically exists within these cards. You just have to pair them up correctly. Protection from battle damage, protection from destruction, right here. Boosting over attack, right here. Another card for boosting over attack so you can use them in the same turn, right here. Destroy a card on the field, it's right here. Destroy something in the destroy a spell or trap, right here. No battle damage, it's right here. I don't want to be targeted, that's here too. You can basically do anything with this deck, and that's why I say the Bujins are such a versatile archetype, because the Beast Warriors have infinite power basically if these cards have been set up for them to use. So yeah, those are the Bujingi monsters. Okay, so the next thing to discuss is the new XYZ monsters that the Bujins got in the first pack that had XYZ summoning released. Now, in my opinion, I've always loved the Bujins and they were always a great deck, but to me, they became really competitive once they got XYZ summoning. So let's talk about the two XYZ monsters that currently exist for the archetype. There are more in the TCG that might get brought over. Some of them are decent, some of them really good, but for now, this is what we've got and let's run with it. So this is the big boss monster of the archetype, Bugente Susano, right? This takes two level 4 Bujin monsters to create, so it doesn't have to be your Beast Warriors. Any two Bujin monsters on the field, boom, you get an XYZ Susano. This card can attack all monsters your opponent controls once each. That's not an XYZ material effect. This card is just built different. Basically, it's basically a Purgatrio. For any time that, yeah, you can attack everything. You can attack everything. Let's say you destroy a monster and that monster special summons a monster to take its place. You can attack that monster too. Anything that is on the field, this thing gets to attack it, right? Okay, so moving on to this card's actual XYZ detach effect. You can detach one XYZ material from this card, take one Bujin monster from your deck, and either add it to your hand or send it to the graveyard. So what this basically is Yamato's effect, but faster. You don't have to wait till the end phase to activate this effect. You just choose whatever monster that you want from your deck. You can, if it's a hand Bujin, then bring it to your hand. If it's a graveyard Bujin, send it to the graveyard. So you can choose whatever effect you currently need. Or let's say you haven't used your normal summon, add Yamato to your hand, boom, you summon him onto the field, right? That is insane, right? So this is an extremely powerful card, and also because you're detaching an XYZ material to activate its effect. Let's say you've gotten Fiendish Chained and you have a you have a Bujingi Centipede attached to this card. You detach the material, and sure, you can't activate this card's effect, but what you can do is use a Centipede in the graveyard to then destroy the Fiendish Chain, because all that's been negated is the Bugente Susano. Centipede wasn't negated, and Centipede is now in the graveyard, so this card has tons of utility within its own archetype, right? So this is really good. This is really good. There are tons of combo plays you can do with it, and I will teach you about them in the deck guide video. But yeah, that is Bugente Susano, and it is your main, it's your boss monster basically. Next, you have Bujinte Tsukuyomi. Now this card is super rare, and I never used to understand why. I used to not rate this card until in the KC Cup I learned how useful it can be. Ow, my throat, what just happened? Anyway, this card takes 2 level 4 light monsters. Once per turn, you can detach 1 XYZ material from this card and send your entire hand to the graveyard. If you do this, then you draw 2 cards. Now the thing about this card is, let's say you use a monster heavy, a Bujingi monster heavy deck where you have tons of Bujingi monsters. This card is a godsend. Let's say you have 5 different Bujingi monsters in your hand. Boom, they're all in the graveyard. You have 5 different effects at your disposal. But if you run a more streamlined version of the deck where you have monsters that you want to keep a hold of in your hand, then this doesn't prove as useful. However, it has another effect. When this card you controlled while face up leaves the field because of an opponent's card effect, you can target level 4 Beast Warrior Bujin monsters in your graveyard up to the number of XZ materials this card still had on the field, special summon those targets. So this card floats, but it has what is in my opinion the best floating effect in the game. Because this card doesn't say if this card is destroyed. This card doesn't say if this card is banished. This card says if this card leaves the field in any way based on your opponent's card effect, it will float into potentially 2 new Bujin monsters from your graveyard that have access to all of the Bujingi monsters that are currently in your graveyard, or can be used for another XYZ summon. This card is the perfect bait. If this card gets sent back to your hand by your opponent's Bryonic, boom, you get to summon. If this card gets banished by a Karma Cut, you get to summon. If this card gets destroyed by a, what's that card called? Raigeki Break, you get to summon your monsters back from the graveyard. Keep in mind, the monsters that are currently attached to it, let's say you have 2 Bujin monsters attached to it currently and it gets destroyed or removed from the field, those 2 materials that just got sent to the graveyard can be brought back. So this card is absolutely insane. It makes you not invincible because you can still be floodgated, and if it gets destroyed by battle, this effect doesn't activate. It has to be by your opponent's card effect, but still, with that limitation in mind, you can bait so many people into destroying this card, so that way you waste their effect and then bring out your Bugente Susano and make your actual play. It's an extremely good card. Just like all of the other Bujin monsters, you can only control 1 of these at a time, but let's be honest, you only need 1 of each of these. So these are extremely powerful cards. Do not sleep on them. And I will show you in some of the matchup videos just how strong this effect can be. Okay, so last but not least, we have the spell and traps of the Bujin archetype. They have quite a few. I haven't used all of them, if I'm being honest. I've used a couple of them. The main one in the deck is Bujin Carnation, for me anyway. With this card, if your opponent controls a monster, and you control no monsters, target 1 Bujin monster that's in your graveyard and 1 of your banished Bujin monsters, and special summon both of them. Which means you now have 2 monsters on the field. They cannot be used as an XYZ material except for the summon of a Beast, Beast Warrior, or Winged Beast type monster. So what that means is you're not even locked into just the Bujin archetype. Let's say you were using this in a Black Wings deck, or if you had a Black Wings XYZ or Synchro monster that existed, you could use this card to facilitate that summon. Right? This card is extremely versatile, and if you remember the effect of the Bujingi Fox where it banishes itself to send a monster to the graveyard, that card alone makes it so that you take no damage on the turn that you activate that card. So let's say that card is in your graveyard, your opponent attacks you directly while you have no monsters, you send a monster from your hand to the graveyard, banish Bujingi Fox, you can now immediately use Bujin Carnation on your next turn to go into an XYZ monster, so it's crazy. Next you have Bujin Unity. If you control no other cards and have at least 1 other card in your hand, you can shuffle all of the Beast Warrior Bujin monsters from your graveyard into the deck. If you do that, send your entire hand to the graveyard, and you can add 3 Beast Warrior Bujin monsters from your graveyard to your hand. So what this card effectively says is you get to reshuffle your deck, add more monsters to your deck so you don't deck out, and then if you want to, you can then add some Beast Warrior Bujin monsters to your hand. The only downside to this, and why I think Bujin Carnation is better as a last resort kind of card, is because you have to control no other cards, meaning that you can't have any other spell or trap card set on the field. Everything has to be gone. This is a true last resort card. I used to use this very heavily, as you'll see in some of the older decks that I show you in the upcoming videos. But yeah, this card is, in my opinion, a slightly worse Bujin Carnation, but it does have its uses if you want to use it in your Bujin deck. Bujin Intervention. Now, this card is one that I've never used myself, but if you read the effect, it sounds like it could be useful. Target 1 Bujin monster on the field, so any Bujin monster, apply this effect to it for the rest of this turn. Every time it destroys a battle whose current attack is greater than its original attack and sends it to the graveyard, banish the destroyed monster. And if you do, banish all monsters from your opponent's hand, main deck, extra deck, and graveyard with the same name as that destroyed monster. Right? Now, what's crazy about this effect is that the Bujins are all about raising their attacks using the effect of Crane and Sinew. So if you use the Crane to boost over a monster and destroy it, after having used this card on one of your monsters, you get to banish everything that is related to that card, basically from the hand, deck, graveyard, everything. This card on its own can win you duels. Now, the reason why I don't use it is because of how situational it is, because not only do you already have to have the Sinew in your graveyard or the Crane in your hand set up, not only do you have to have a monster on the field that you're going to use to attack, but you also have to have this card in your hand. Very situational, and it's a kind of card that you only want to get added to your hand after you've done all of your setup. It's a very strong effect, and to be honest, reading it again now, I'm probably going to make use of it because it sounds so useful. All of the cards from their deck, extra deck, hand, and graveyard, that is an insane effect. That could be broken, to be honest, so we'll find out. We'll see. Next, Bujin Regalia the Mirror. At the start of your main phase, if your opponent controls more monsters than you do, and you control a Beast Warrior Bujin monster, until the end of your opponent's next turn, spell and trap cards and their effects cannot be activated. So basically just lock your opponent out of spells and traps. This can be very good, to be honest. Again, another card that I don't use, but now that I read it, you could actually get a lot of utility out of this from the Bujin Double Jump strat, which is another one that I'm going to teach you later on. So, moving on, Bujin Regalia the Sword, probably the most popular spell and trap from the Bujins because a lot of the NPCs use this. Activate one of these effects, target 1 Bujin monster in your graveyard, add it to your hand, target one of your banished Bujin monsters, send that target to the graveyard. So what this card basically says is you've used a Bujingi monster as a material, or rather you've used its effect once. Let's say it's a hand Bujin, okay, add it back to your hand so you can use that effect again. So that's like having a second Crane in your deck without having a second Crane in your deck. Or you've used the Centipede to destroy a spell or trap, well, you can just add that card back to the graveyard after it banishes itself. So it's got a lot of utility. Bujin Regalia the Jewel. Target 1 rank 4 XYZ monster you control, equip this card to that target. It gains 300 attack for each XYZ material attached to it. Once per turn, while this card is equipped to a monster by this effect, you can attach 1 Bujin monster from your hand to the equipped monster as an XYZ material. So this card basically just says, oh, you're running low on XYZ materials, I'll keep on feeding you more. It's a very easy way to get monsters from your hand to the graveyard if you need to do that, because remember, the XYZ monsters have to detach the materials to activate effects, so you're just gaining more and more materials to send cards to the graveyard. It can be really good. Bujin Fidel is the last one. Tribute 1 Beast Warrior Bujin type monster you control, and target 1 Bujin monster with a different name in your graveyard to special summon it. So say you have a Mikazuchi but you want a Yamato, tribute it, get your Yamato back. Those are the spells and traps in the Bujin deck, and those are all of the cards in the Bujin archetype. Effectively, that is everything. Now I might cut back to the original video that I recorded at this point. We'll see. Give me a second. I'll be right back. So that is all of the cards in the archetype currently. Yeah, these are the cards in the deck. This video is already long enough, so the next video that we're going to do is going to be explaining how to build these cards into a deck. But if you've heard these effects and you think they're kind of cool, then feel free to try and build your own deck before I make that video and see what you come up with. There might be something amazing. So please enjoy the archetype. I just wanted to highlight something cool and fun and different. You know, we're entering a new meta. I'm not saying that this is the best deck in the world. I feel like it is because I love these cards, but yeah, maybe give them a chance. So I think that's everything I wanted to say. So bye.